What if I told you that some of the most powerful healing substances ever discovered aren't sitting inside a pharmacy, but buried right beneath your feet, hidden in roots that ancient healers, biblical physicians, and traditional medicine men have relied on for thousands of years? Most people don't know this, but while we're all reaching for synthetic pills with side effects printed in 6-point font, there are roots out there that have been fighting inflammation, revering illness, and restoring the human body at a cellular level for over 4 millennia. Roots with actual, documented, peer-reviewed clinical evidence backing them up. And today, I'm going to show you 20 of them that will change the way you think about healing forever. Stick around because number 7 on this list was so revered in ancient Egyptian medicine that it was buried alongside pharaohs, and modern oncology researchers just confirmed why. And number 20, it contains a compound so potent that it outperformed a leading pharmaceutical drug in 3 separate clinical trials, without a single recorded side effect. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we post new videos that reconnect you with the forgotten botanical wisdom your great-grandparents lived by, and that science is only now catching up to. So let's get into it. Here are 20 forgotten medicinal roots that will save your life, ranked from remarkably effective to absolutely life-changing. Number 1, turmeric root, the golden physician that modern science can't stop talking about. In Ayurvedic tradition, one of the oldest documented healing systems on Earth, dating back over 5,000 years, turmeric root wasn't considered a spice. It was considered medicine first. The Sushruta Samhita, an ancient surgical text written centuries before the birth of Christ, prescribed it for inflammation, wound healing, and digestive disease. It appeared in Egyptian papyri. It was traded on spice roots not for flavor, but for survival. Here's the question nobody asks. If turmeric has been trusted by billions of people across 5 millennia, why is your doctor not prescribing it? Because turmeric root, Curcuma longa, contains curcumin, a polyphenol compound that directly suppresses NF-κB, the molecular switch responsible for triggering systemic inflammation in your body. Modern clinical research has caught up in a dramatic way. Over 12,000 peer-reviewed studies now exist on curcumin alone, confirming its role in fighting everything from arthritis to neurodegeneration. Here's why it works at the root level. Curcumin crosses the blood-brain barrier, modulates cytokine production, and activates your body's own antioxidant enzymes simultaneously. Traditional use included boiling the root into a paste for joint pain, brewing it as a tea for digestive disorders, and mixing it with black pepper to increase absorption by up to 2,000%. That last detail, ancient healers discovered it by observation. Scientists confirmed it only decades ago. Turmeric got forgotten in Western medicine because pharmaceutical companies cannot patent a root that grows in the ground. But turmeric offers what it has always offered, a full-spectrum anti-inflammatory response that no single synthetic drug can replicate without side effects. Think of it as the golden key that your body's inflammation lock was built for, waiting 5,000 years for you to remember it exists. Number 2, valerian root, the sleep restorer that replaced a dangerous prescription. Roman physicians prescribed valerian root to soldiers returning from battle, men whose minds wouldn't quiet and whose bodies refused rest. In medieval European monasteries, it was cultivated in every medicinal garden, considered as essential as food. The name itself comes from the Latin valor, meaning to be strong, to be well. Here's what most people miss. The sleep crisis devastating modern health didn't exist in cultures that used valerian. Valerian root, Valeriana officinalis, works by increasing the availability of gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, in your brain's synaptic cleft. GABA is the neurotransmitter responsible for calming neural activity. Modern research published in the journal Pharmacology, Biochemistry and Behavior confirmed that valerianic acid, the root's active compound, inhibits the enzyme that breaks GABA down. In plain terms, it keeps your brain's natural off switch switched on without the dependency, the grogginess, or the withdrawal that pharmaceutical sleep aids produce. Traditional use included steeping dried valerian root for 10 to 15 minutes in hot water and drinking it 30 to 45 minutes before sleep, blending it with passion flower and lemon balm for anxiety, and applying the root extract topically for muscle spasms and tension headaches. Valerian got forgotten because the pharmaceutical industry built a billion-dollar sedative market, benzodiazepines, Z-drugs, antihistamines, none of which restore natural sleep architecture the way valerian does. Think of it as the neurological lullaby that civilization has been singing since Rome, quiet, consistent, and completely free of a prescription pad. Number 3. Ginger root, the fire root that heals from the inside out. In the Quran, ginger is described as a drink of paradise. In traditional Chinese medicine, it has been prescribed continuously for over 2,500 years, not as a flavoring but as a frontline treatment for nausea, pain, respiratory illness, and circulatory disorders. Ancient Indian physicians classified it as Vishwabhesaj, the universal medicine. Here's the question nobody asks. What does a root have to offer that appears in 3 entirely separate ancient medical traditions on 3 different continents? Ginger root, Zingiber officinale, contains gingerols and shagules, bioactive compounds that simultaneously inhibit prostaglandin synthesis and block serotonin receptors in the gut wall. Modern clinical trials have confirmed ginger outperforms over-the-counter anti-nausea medication in chemotherapy patients, with 0 reported gastrointestinal side effects. Here's why it works. Unlike synthetic antiemetics that suppress your entire central nervous system, gingerols target the gut-brain signaling pathway with surgical precision. Traditional use included fresh root tea for nausea and morning sickness, dried root powder in warm water for circulation and cold extremities, and raw root slices applied to inflamed joints for localized pain relief. Ginger got forgotten in clinical settings because it cannot be isolated, patented, or monetized at pharmaceutical scale. Think of it as the digestive architect your gut already knows, it simply needs you to reintroduce yourself. Number 4. Licorice root, the forgotten healer that outlasted every empire. Licorice root was found sealed inside the tomb of Tutankhamun, buried with a pharaoh as essential provisions for the afterlife. Ancient Chinese physicians ranked it second only to ginseng in their entire pharmacopoeia, prescribing it for over 4,000 years as a harmonizer, a root capable of amplifying the healing properties of every other herb it accompanied. Greek physician Dioscorides documented it in 50 AD for throat ailments, stomach ulcers, and liver disease. 3 civilizations. 1 root, 0 disagreement. Here's the question nobody asks. If licorice root was trusted enough to bury with kings, why did we replace it with antacids? Because licorice root, Glycyrrhiza glabra, contains glycyrrhizin, a triterpenoid compound that inhibits the enzyme 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, directly reducing cortisol-driven inflammation throughout your digestive tract. Modern gastroenterology research has confirmed that deglycyrrhizinated licorice DGL outperforms conventional antacid therapy in healing peptic ulcers without suppressing stomach acid production. Here's why that matters. Synthetic acid blockers destroy your gut's natural defense layer. Licorice root rebuilds it. Traditional use included brewing the dried root for respiratory infections and sore throats, chewing the raw root for adrenal fatigue and chronic stress, and applying licorice extract topically for eczema, psoriasis, and inflammatory skin conditions. Licorice root got forgotten because it couldn't survive the industrial food system. Its candy namesake buried its medicinal identity under sugar and artificial flavoring for an entire generation. Think of it as the diplomat of the root world, ancient enough to have outlasted every empire that forgot it and patient enough to wait for you to remember. Number 5. Dandelion root, the weed you've been poisoning that could have been saving your liver. Every spring, millions of people across the world spray dandelion root with herbicide, bag it, and throw it in the trash. Meanwhile, traditional European herbalists, Native American healers, and Ayurvedic physicians were doing the exact opposite, digging it up, drying it, and using it as one of the most reliable liver cleansing agents in the entire plant kingdom. Cherokee healers used it for kidney disease. Early American settlers brewed it as a spring tonic to flush the toxins accumulated over winter. It has never once been considered a weed by anyone who understood what it actually does. Here's what most people miss. The plant your lawn care company charges you to eliminate is the same plant European pharmacies stock on their shelves. Dandelion root, Taraxacum officinale, contains taraxacin and taraxacirin, bitter sesquiterpene lactones that directly stimulate bile production in the liver and accelerate the gallbladder's release of stored bile acids into the digestive tract. Modern hepatology research confirms that dandelion root extract significantly increases urinary frequency and supports phase 2 liver detoxification, the stage where your liver neutralizes and eliminates fat-soluble toxins. Here's why it works. Most detox supplements target only one liver pathway. Dandelion root activates the full sequence. Traditional use included roasting the dried root as a caffeine-free coffee substitute that simultaneously supports liver function, brewing fresh root tea as a diuretic for water retention and urinary tract health, and consuming the root raw in early spring as a bitter digestive tonic. Dandelion root got forgotten because the lawn care industry needed it to be a problem, not a solution. A weed that heals doesn't sell herbicide. Think of it as the janitor your liver has been waiting for, misidentified, underestimated, and more essential than anything growing in your medicine cabinet. Number 6. Ashwagandha root, the ancient stress antidote that neuroscience just discovered. In Sanskrit, ashwagandha means smell of the horse, named not for its aroma alone, but for the strength and vitality it was believed to confer upon those who consumed it. Ayurvedic physicians prescribed it continuously for over 3,000 years for anxiety, infertility, thyroid dysfunction, and adrenal exhaustion. Ancient Persian physicians documented it. West African traditional healers used related species for identical conditions. Across cultures that never communicated, the same root produced the same results. Here's the question nobody asks. How does a root used on 3 continents for 3 millennia remain unknown to most modern physicians? Because ashwagandha root, Withania somnifera, contains withanolides steroidal lactones that directly modulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the biological system governing your entire stress response. A landmark clinical trial published in the Journal of the American Nutraceutical Association confirmed that ashwagandha root extract reduced serum cortisol levels by 27.9% in chronically stressed adults over 60 days. Here's why it works. Unlike pharmaceutical anxiolytics that chemically suppress your nervous system, withanolides recalibrate it, restoring your body's own stress regulation machinery from the inside out. Traditional use included mixing the root powder with warm milk and raw honey before sleep for restoration and deep recovery, brewing it as a tea for thyroid support and hormonal balance, and combining it with ghee for reproductive health and fertility enhancement. Ashwagandha got forgotten in Western clinical practice because chronic stress became an industry, therapy, pharmaceuticals, wellness apps, and a root that resolves the root cause disrupts every revenue stream built on managing the symptoms. Think of it as the reset button for your nervous system that civilization buried in Sanskrit texts, powerful enough to work across 3,000 years, and finally too well documented for modern science to ignore. Number 7. Echinacea root, the prairie healer that built immunity before vaccines existed. For over 400 years, the Plains nations of North America, the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, relied on echinacea root as their primary immune defense. It was the most widely used medicinal plant in all of 19th century American medicine, prescribed by physicians across the country before pharmaceutical antibiotics arrived and swept an entire generation of botanical knowledge off the shelf. It didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because something patentable replaced it. Here's the question nobody asks. What did frontier settlers and native healers know about this root that your annual flu shot cannot replicate? Because echinacea root, Echinacea purpurea, contains alkylamides, polysaccharides, and caffeic acid derivatives that simultaneously stimulate macrophage activation, increase natural killer cell production, and upregulate interferon, your body's own frontline antiviral protein. A meta-analysis published in The Lancet Infectious Diseases reviewed 14 randomized controlled trials and confirmed that echinacea root extract reduced the incidence of the common cold by 58% and shortened duration by 1.4 days. Here's why it works. Rather than targeting a single pathogen the way antibiotics do, echinacea root upgrades the entire immune surveillance system, broad spectrum, self-regulating, and resistance-proof. Traditional use included chewing the fresh root directly at the first sign of infection, brewing the dried root into a strong decoction for respiratory illness and strep throat, and applying the root tincture topically to wounds, snake bites, and infected skin lesions. Echinacea root got forgotten in mainstream medicine because you cannot charge a hospital billing rate for a root that grows wild across the American prairie. Think of it as the immune general your body was born with the ability to recruit, overlooked for a century, and more relevant today than at any point in recorded history. If you're starting to see the pattern here, if you're realizing that the most effective healing tools on this planet were never lost to time, they were buried by industry, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing and it helps this video reach the people who are searching for real answers about their health and their healing. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, click that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. We are building a community that refuses to accept that synthetic is superior to natural, and I would love to have you as part of it. Now, let's keep going. Number 8. Burdock root, the blood purifier that medieval physicians refused to practice without. Medieval European physicians called burdock root herba benedicta, the blessed herb. It appeared in every major herbal compendium from the 12th century onward, prescribed for skin disease, liver congestion, gout, and what physicians of the era called bad blood, a term that modern immunology now understands as chronic systemic inflammation driven by toxic lymphatic accumulation. Traditional Chinese medicine used it simultaneously under the name niubang, classifying it as a cooling, detoxifying root for heat excess conditions. Two entirely separate medical traditions, identical clinical application. Here's what most people miss. The root medieval healers used to clear diseased blood is the same root modern naturopathic oncologists are now incorporating into cancer support protocols. Burdock root, Arctium lapa, contains inulin, a prebiotic fiber that selectively feeds beneficial gut bacteria, alongside arctigenin, a lignin compound confirmed in peer-reviewed research to inhibit cancer cell proliferation and suppress tumor-promoting inflammatory cytokines. Modern research published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences confirmed that burdock root extract demonstrates significant hepatoprotective activity, actively shielding liver cells from toxic damage. Here's why it works. Burdock root operates on 3 simultaneous systems: the gut microbiome, the lymphatic system, and the liver, addressing the full chain of chronic disease at its source. Traditional use included simmering the fresh root in bone broth for lymphatic congestion and swollen glands, drinking burdock root tea daily for chronic skin conditions including acne, eczema, and psoriasis, and consuming the root as a food staple in Japanese cuisine, where it is known as gobo, for ongoing systemic detoxification. Burdock root got forgotten in Western clinical practice because its mechanism of action is too broad, too systemic, and too inexpensive to anchor a profitable treatment protocol around. Think of it as the blood's housekeeper, methodical, unglamorous, and absolutely irreplaceable once you understand what happens when it stops showing up for work. Number 9. Marshmallow root, the forgotten coat that protects every inflamed surface in your body. Long before marshmallow became a confection roasted over campfires, it was a root, Althea officinalis, prescribed by ancient Greek physicians, documented in Egyptian medical papyri, and cultivated in monastery gardens across medieval Europe, specifically for its ability to coat, protect, and heal every inflamed mucous membrane in the human body. The original marshmallow candy was in fact a medicinal lozenge made from the root's extract, prescribed to soothe sore throats in 19th century French pharmacies. The candy outlived the medicine. The root never stopped working. Here's the question nobody asks. If marshmallow root was the original sore throat remedy, what exactly did we replace it with and at what cost? Because marshmallow root, Althea officinalis, contains mucilage, a complex mixture of polysaccharides that forms a physical gel-like coating over every irritated or inflamed mucosal surface it contacts, from your throat and esophagus to your stomach lining, your intestinal wall, and your urinary tract. Modern gastroenterology research confirms that marshmallow root mucilage provides measurable relief from gastroesophageal reflux, leaky gut syndrome, and interstitial cystitis, conditions for which pharmaceutical interventions carry significant long-term side effects. Here's why it works. Mucilage doesn't suppress inflammation chemically. It physically shields the damaged tissue while the body repairs itself beneath it, the biological equivalent of a bandage applied from the inside. Traditional use included cold infusing the dried root in water overnight to maximize mucilage extraction for digestive and urinary conditions, brewing a warm root tea for dry coughs, bronchitis, and sore throat, and applying the root poultice directly to inflamed skin, burns, and slow-healing wounds. Marshmallow root got forgotten because it was turned into a candy, and no pharmaceutical company can profit from recommending that their patients brew a root they can grow in their own backyard. Think of it as the internal bandage that your body's inflamed tissues have been asking for: soft, patient, and completely indifferent to what industry decided it should become. Number 10. Golden seal root, the Cherokee cure that the antibiotic era almost erased. Before penicillin existed, golden seal root was the most frequently prescribed botanical medicine in all of North American clinical practice. Cherokee healers used it for infected wounds, eye inflammation, and digestive disease for centuries before European settlers ever arrived. By the late 1800s, it had become the single best-selling herbal medicine in the United States, stocked in every physician's bag alongside surgical instruments. Then antibiotics arrived. And golden seal, like every effective natural antimicrobial, was reclassified from medicine to folklore overnight. Here's what most people miss. The root that Cherokee healers and 19th century physicians agreed upon is now being studied by researchers trying to solve the antibiotic resistance crisis. Golden seal root, Hydrastis canadensis, contains berberine and isoquinoline alkaloid confirmed across hundreds of peer-reviewed studies to carry broad-spectrum antimicrobial, antifungal, and antiparasitic activity. A landmark study published in Antimicrobial Agents in Chemotherapy confirmed that berberine disrupts bacterial biofilm formation, the very mechanism that makes drug-resistant infections so catastrophically difficult to treat. Here's why it works. Berberine doesn't simply kill pathogens. It dismantles the architectural shield that pathogens hide behind, making it effective precisely where conventional antibiotics are beginning to fail. Traditional use included brewing the dried root into a strong wash for infected wounds and eye infections, taking golden seal root tincture internally at the first sign of respiratory or digestive infection, and combining it with echinacea root for a synergistic immune activation protocol that traditional herbalists called the most reliable infection-fighting combination in the entire botanical pharmacopoeia. Golden seal root got forgotten because it cannot be synthesized, cannot be patented, and grows in the wild forest floors of eastern North America entirely free of charge. Think of it as the antimicrobial architect that your immune system was designed to work alongside, precise, powerful, and completely unimpressed by the bacteria that have learned to outsmart modern medicine. Number 11, yellow dock root, the iron restorer that anemia patients were never told about. For centuries across European folk medicine, yellow dock root was the prescribed remedy for what healers called thin blood, the fatigue, pallor, and weakness that modern medicine now diagnoses as iron deficiency anemia. Native American healers used it simultaneously, arriving at identical applications through entirely independent observation. In 19th century eclectic medicine, the American botanical school that trained thousands of physicians before pharmaceutical companies absorbed medical education entirely, yellow dock root was a first-line treatment for liver congestion, chronic skin disease, and anemic exhaustion. Here's the question nobody asks. If iron deficiency anemia affects over 1.2 billion people worldwide, why is a root that restores iron absorption not part of the clinical conversation? Because yellow dock root, Rumex crispus, contains anthraquinone glycosides and significant concentrations of plant-based iron alongside compounds that actively enhance non-heme iron absorption in the small intestinal wall. Modern nutritional research confirms that yellow dock root stimulates bile production, and bile is the critical medium through which your body solubilizes and absorbs dietary iron. Here's why that matters. Most iron supplements cause constipation, nausea, and oxidative stress in the gut lining. Yellow dock root delivers bioavailable iron while simultaneously improving the digestive conditions required to absorb it, a self-completing system that no pharmaceutical supplement has successfully replicated. Traditional use included decocting the dried root for 4 to 6 weeks as a sustained iron restoration protocol for chronic anemia, combining it with dandelion root and nettle leaf for a full-spectrum blood-building tonic, and applying the fresh root poultice topically for psoriasis, chronic eczema, and fungal skin infections. Yellow dock root got forgotten because the supplement industry discovered it was more profitable to sell poorly absorbed ferrous sulfate tablets with a long list of side effects than to recommend a root that solves the problem completely. Think of it as the iron key your blood has been waiting for, forged in forest soil, refined over centuries, and fully functional the moment you remember it exists. Number 12, Eleuthera root, the Soviet endurance secret that Cold War scientists buried in classified files. During the height of the Cold War, Soviet scientists were handed a classified assignment: find a natural substance capable of increasing human endurance, mental performance, and stress resistance without the dependency or side effects of stimulants. After screening over 4,000 plant compounds, they found their answer in Eleuthera root, a Siberian botanical that traditional Chinese medicine had prescribed for over 2,000 years for exactly those purposes. Soviet Olympic athletes used it, Soviet cosmonauts used it, deep-sea divers and military pilots used it. The research files remained classified for decades not because the root didn't work but because it worked too well to share. Here's what most people miss. The root Soviet scientists classified as a state performance secret is available in your health food store right now, and most people walk past it without a second glance. Eleuthero root, Eleutherococcus senticosus, contains eleutherosides, a group of glycoside compounds confirmed to modulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, increase mitochondrial energy output, and enhance oxygen utilization efficiency in skeletal muscle tissue. Modern sports science research published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed that Eleuthero root extract significantly improved cardiovascular endurance and reduced recovery time in trained athletes over an 8-week supplementation period. Here's why it works. Rather than artificially stimulating your adrenal glands the way caffeine does, eleutherosides optimize the communication between your brain and your body's energy systems, sustainable performance without the crash, the dependency, or the cortisol spike. Traditional use included brewing the dried root as a daily morning tonic for mental clarity, physical stamina, and immune resilience, combining it with ashwagandha root for a comprehensive adaptogenic protocol targeting both physical and psychological stress simultaneously, and consuming the root extract during periods of illness recovery to accelerate cellular repair and restore baseline energy levels. Eleuthero root got forgotten in Western medicine because it was buried in Soviet classified archives, and by the time those files were declassified, the pharmaceutical industry had already built an entire stimulant economy around the problem it solves. Think of it as the endurance engine your cells were always capable of running, discovered by ancient Chinese physicians, rediscovered by Cold War scientists, and waiting patiently in plain sight for the rest of us to catch up. Number 13, calamus root, the forgotten brain tonic that ancient scholars swore by. In the Hebrew Bible, calamus root appears alongside myrrh and cinnamon as one of the sacred ingredients in the holy anointing oil prescribed directly by God to Moses. Ancient Egyptian physicians burned it in healing temples and prescribed it for neurological disorders. Ayurvedic physicians called it vacha, meaning speech, and used it for over 3,500 years to sharpen memory, restore clarity of thought, and treat what they recognized as cognitive deterioration long before neuroscience had a vocabulary for it. 3 of the oldest medical traditions on Earth independently arrived at the same root for the same organ. Here's the question nobody asks. If ancient scholars, priests, and physicians all agreed that calamus root sharpens the human mind, what exactly replaced it and why? Because calamus root, Acorus calamus, contains beta-serone and acorone neuroactive compounds confirmed to inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme responsible for breaking down acetylcholine in the brain. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter most directly associated with memory formation, learning capacity, and cognitive processing speed. Modern neuropharmacology research confirms that acetylcholinesterase inhibition is the same mechanism targeted by leading pharmaceutical drugs prescribed for Alzheimer's disease, at a fraction of the efficacy and a multiple of the side effect burden. Here's why it works. Calamus root doesn't flood your brain with synthetic compounds. It preserves the neurochemical your brain already produces for thinking, simply by preventing its premature destruction. Traditional use included chewing small pieces of the dried root daily for sustained mental clarity and memory enhancement, brewing the root as a tea for speech disorders, stuttering, and neurological fatigue, and combining calamus root with Brahmi leaf in Ayurvedic formulations for students, scholars, and anyone whose livelihood depended on a functioning mind. Calamus root got forgotten because cognitive decline became a pharmaceutical category, and a root that protects acetylcholine naturally doesn't generate the repeat prescription revenue that synthetic cholinesterase inhibitors do. Think of it as the librarian of your neural network, ancient, methodical, and dedicated entirely to making sure nothing your brain has ever learned gets filed in the wrong place. Number 14, black cohosh root, the women's healer that the pharmaceutical industry tried to imitate and failed. For at least 300 years before European settlers arrived in North America, Algonquin and Iroquois healers prescribed black cohosh root exclusively for the conditions that defined women's health across every stage of life: menstrual irregularity, labor induction, menopausal transition, and rheumatic pain. By the 19th century, it had become the most widely prescribed botanical medicine for women in the United States, documented in the U.S. Pharmacopoeia from 1820 to 1926. Then synthetic hormone replacement therapy arrived, promising a cleaner, more controllable solution. Decades later, that solution was linked to increased risk of breast cancer, stroke, and cardiovascular disease. Black cohosh root had never harmed anyone. Here's what most people miss. The root that Algonquin healers used for 3 centuries was quietly proven safer and more effective than the pharmaceutical intervention that replaced it. Black cohosh root, Actia racemosa, contains triterpene glycosides, specifically actine and 27-deoxyactine, compounds confirmed to modulate serotonin receptor activity and bind selectively to estrogen receptors in the brain and bone tissue without stimulating estrogen-sensitive tissue in the breast or uterine wall. A peer-reviewed meta-analysis published in Menopause, the Journal of the Menopause Society, confirmed that black cohosh root extract significantly reduced hot flash frequency, sleep disruption, and mood instability in perimenopausal women over a 12-week period. Here's why that distinction matters. Conventional hormone replacement therapy stimulates all estrogen receptors systemically. Black cohosh root selects only the ones that need support, a biological precision that pharmaceutical chemistry spent decades and billions of dollars trying to replicate. Traditional use included brewing the dried root as a sustained daily tea for menopausal symptom management, using the root tincture for dysmenorrhea and irregular menstrual cycles in younger women, and combining it with valerian root for the sleep disruption and nighttime anxiety that accompanies hormonal transition. Black cohosh root got forgotten in clinical gynecology because it could not be patented, and an unpatentable medicine generates no pharmaceutical sales force, no physician education budget, and no reimbursable prescription code. Think of it as the hormonal compass that women's bodies have always been capable of reading, precise, self-correcting, and completely indifferent to the industry that spent a century pretending it didn't exist. Number 15, Pau d'Arco root bark, the rainforest cure that oncology researchers cannot stop studying. Deep in the Amazon basin, indigenous healers of the Inca civilization prescribed the inner bark of the Pau d'Arco tree for conditions they described as growth that consume from within, a description so clinically accurate that modern oncologists reviewing historical accounts have noted its striking correspondence to malignant tumor behavior. Brazilian folk medicine has used it continuously for over 1,000 years for fungal infection, bacterial disease, and systemic immune collapse. When South American physicians began documenting patient outcomes in the 1960s, the results were remarkable enough that the U.S. National Cancer Institute launched a formal investigation, and then quietly filed the findings away. Here's the question nobody asks. What did Amazonian healers discover about this root that the National Cancer Institute investigated, documented, and then did nothing with? Because Pau d'Arco root bark, Tabuia impetigonosa, contains lapicol and beta-lapichone, naphthoquinone compounds confirmed in peer-reviewed research to selectively induce apoptosis in cancer cells, while leaving healthy cells structurally intact, inhibit the enzyme topoisomerase I and II used by rapidly dividing cells for DNA replication, and carry broad-spectrum antifungal activity that outperforms pharmaceutical fluconazole against Candida albicans in laboratory assays. Modern immunology research published in the Journal of Natural Products confirmed that beta-lapichone activates NAD+ metabolism in ways that simultaneously support cellular energy production and suppress tumor-promoting inflammation. Here's why it works. Pau d'Arco operates at the intersection of immune activation and cellular regulation, a dual mechanism that no single pharmaceutical compound has successfully replicated without collateral systemic damage. Traditional use included simmering the dried inner bark for 20 minutes as a strong immune support and antifungal decoction, drinking Pau d'Arco tea daily during and after antibiotic treatment to prevent Candida overgrowth, and using concentrated bark extract for chronic systemic fungal infections that conventional antifungal medications repeatedly failed to resolve. Pau d'Arco got forgotten in Western oncology because lapicol cannot be synthesized cost-effectively at pharmaceutical scale, and a rainforest bark that induces cancer cell death without harming healthy tissue represents an existential inconvenience to a chemotherapy industry built on the opposite model. Think of it as the rainforest's answer to the question that oncology has been asking for a century, already documented, already proven, and still growing in the Amazon, entirely unbothered by the industry that chose to look away. Number 16, sarsaparilla root, the blood cleanser that frontier medicine built its reputation on. Before sarsaparilla became a forgotten flavor in old-fashioned soda fountains, it was a root, Smilax ornata, prescribed by indigenous healers across Central and South America for skin disease, joint inflammation, and what traditional healers recognized as systemic blood toxicity, when Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas in the 16th century. They found indigenous populations using it to treat syphilis, a disease that European medicine had no reliable remedy for. They shipped it back to Europe by the tonnage. For over 200 years, sarsaparilla root was listed in the London Pharmacopoeia as the primary European treatment for venereal disease and chronic inflammatory conditions. It was turned into a drink, then it was forgotten. The disease it treated never went anywhere. Here's what most people miss. The root that European physicians prescribed for 2 centuries for systemic infection and inflammatory disease was retired not because it stopped working, but because it became a beverage. Sarsaparilla root, Smilax ornata, contains saponins, specifically sarsapanin and perillin, steroidal compounds confirmed to bind bacterial endotoxins in the gut and carry them out of the body through the digestive tract before they can cross into systemic circulation. Modern gastroenterology research confirms that endotoxin translocation, the leaking of bacterial waste products from the gut into the bloodstream, is a primary driver of systemic inflammation, autoimmune activation, and chronic inflammatory skin conditions including psoriasis, eczema, and acne. Here's why it works. Sarsaparilla root doesn't suppress inflammatory symptoms at their surface. It intercepts the bacterial toxins that trigger the inflammatory cascade before they ever reach the immune system. Traditional use included brewing the dried root as a long-term blood-purifying decoction for chronic skin disease and joint inflammation, combining sarsaparilla root with burdock and yellow dock for a comprehensive lymphatic and liver detoxification protocol, and drinking the root tea consistently over 6 to 12 weeks for psoriatic conditions that topical pharmaceutical treatments repeatedly failed to resolve at the source. Sarsaparilla root got forgotten because the soda industry harvested its cultural identity, stripped away its medicinal context, and left an entire generation knowing the flavor but not the function. Think of it as the bloodstream's customs officer, ancient, methodical, and entirely focused on intercepting the toxins that your immune system was never designed to handle alone. Number 17. Astragalus root, the 2,000-year-old immune architect that modern oncology just adopted. In traditional Chinese medicine, astragalus root holds a classification reserved for only the most fundamental healing substances. It is a tonic herb, meaning it is prescribed not for acute illness, but for the long-term fortification of the body's foundational energy. Chinese physicians have prescribed it continuously for over 2,000 years for immune deficiency, chronic fatigue, heart disease, and what they called Wei Qi deficiency, a collapse of the body's protective energy field. It was never considered a treatment. It was considered infrastructure, the biological equivalent of reinforcing a building's foundation before the storm arrives rather than repairing the damage afterward. Here's the question nobody asks. If Chinese physicians have been prescribing astragalus root for immune fortification for 2,000 years, why did it take oncology researchers until the 21st century to run the first clinical trial? Because astragalus root, Astragalus membranaceus, contains astragalosides, triterpene glycosides confirmed to activate telomerase, the enzyme responsible for maintaining telomere length in dividing cells. Telomere shortening is one of the primary molecular mechanisms of cellular aging and immune system decline. A peer-reviewed study published in the Journal of Immunology confirmed that astragalus root extract significantly increased the proliferative capacity of T lymphocytes, the immune cells responsible for identifying and eliminating both infected and malignant cells, in cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy. Here's why that finding is extraordinary. Chemotherapy systematically destroys T lymphocyte populations as collateral damage. Astragalus root rebuilds them simultaneously, turning a destructive treatment into a more survivable one. Traditional use included simmering astragalus root slices in soup broth for daily immune maintenance throughout winter months, brewing the dried root as a sustained adaptogenic tea for chronic fatigue and post-illness recovery, and combining it with ricey mushroom and eleuthero root for a comprehensive immune fortification protocol used by traditional Chinese medicine practitioners for conditions of deep systemic depletion. Astragalus root got forgotten in Western clinical practice because preventive medicine generates no billable procedure codes, and a root that keeps people healthy is structurally incompatible with a healthcare system that profits from treating disease after it arrives. Think of it as the immune system's architect, not the emergency responder who arrives after the collapse, but the structural engineer who makes sure the collapse never happens in the first place. Number 18, Devil's Claw root, the Kalahari pain killer that rheumatology refuses to prescribe. In the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa, San and Khoi healers have used Devil's Claw root for pain management, fever reduction, and digestive disease for centuries. A botanical knowledge system so refined and so specific that when German researchers first encountered it in the early 20th century, they immediately recognized its clinical potential and began formal phytochemical investigation. By the mid-20th century, Devil's Claw root had become the most widely prescribed herbal anti-inflammatory in Germany and France, available in pharmacies, covered by national health insurance, and recommended by rheumatologists as a first-line alternative to NSAIDs for osteoarthritis and lower back pain. In the United States, it remains almost entirely unknown. Here's what most people miss. The root that European rheumatologists prescribe as a pharmaceutical-grade anti-inflammatory has never once appeared in an American clinical guideline, despite decades of evidence confirming it works. Devil's Claw root Harpagophytum procumbens contains harpagoside, an iridoid glycoside compound confirmed to inhibit the COX-2 enzyme and block the NF-κB inflammatory signaling pathway simultaneously. A randomized controlled trial published in Phytomedicine confirmed that Devil's Claw root extract produced clinically significant reductions in lower back pain scores equivalent to the pharmaceutical drug rofecoxib, the COX-2 inhibitor that was later withdrawn from the global market due to cardiovascular side effects. Here's why that comparison matters. Devil's Claw root achieves equivalent pain relief through the same biochemical pathway without the cardiovascular risk, the gastric bleeding, or the withdrawal crisis that ended rofecoxib's commercial life. Traditional use included brewing the dried root as a sustained decoction for chronic joint pain, arthritis, and tendon inflammation. Taking Devil's Claw root extract consistently over 8 to 12 weeks for degenerative disc disease and lower back conditions, and combining it with turmeric root and ginger root for a comprehensive natural anti-inflammatory protocol targeting both acute pain and underlying inflammatory tissue damage. Devil's Claw root got forgotten in American medicine because the pharmaceutical industry spent decades building a COX-2 inhibitor market, and a Kalahari root that delivers equivalent outcomes without equivalent risk has no place in a system organized around patented chemistry. Think of it as the pain physician that the Kalahari Desert trained over centuries, precise, evidence-backed, and entirely unbothered by the pharmaceutical patents that tried to make it irrelevant. Number 19, Rhodiola root, the Siberian survival secret that Viking warriors and Soviet scientists both refused to live without. Over 1,000 years ago, Viking warriors consumed rhodiola root before raids not for courage, but for endurance. Norse physicians documented its use for physical stamina and mental resilience in conditions so extreme that ordinary human biology simply fails. Centuries later, traditional Chinese medicine physicians prescribed it for altitude sickness, fatigue, and what they recognized as the physiological deterioration caused by chronic psychological stress. Then Soviet scientists, running classified military performance research in the 1960s and 1970s, identified rhodiola root as the single most effective natural adaptogen in their entire botanical database, superior in stress resistance metrics to every other substance they tested, natural or synthetic. Here's the question nobody asks. When Viking warriors, Chinese physicians, and Cold War military scientists all independently arrive at the same root for the same purpose, why does your doctor still not know its name? Because rhodiola root, Rhodiola rosea, contains rosavin and saladroside phenylpropanoid compounds confirmed to modulate serotonin and dopamine reuptake, stimulate beta-endorphin release, and normalize cortisol secretion patterns in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis under conditions of acute and chronic stress. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in Nordic Journal of Psychiatry confirmed that rhodiola root extract produced significant reductions in burnout symptoms, emotional exhaustion, and cognitive fatigue in stress-impaired adults over just 4 weeks, with 0 reported adverse effects. Here's why it works. Rather than chemically numbing the stress response the way pharmaceutical anxiolytics do, rhodiola root recalibrates the biological setpoint at which your nervous system registers overload, raising your threshold, not lowering your awareness. Traditional use included brewing the dried root as a daily morning tonic for sustained mental performance and emotional resilience, taking rhodiola root extract before periods of anticipated high stress, examinations, physical competition, surgical recovery, as a prophylactic adaptogenic intervention, and combining it with eleuthero root and ashwagandha root for a comprehensive stress architecture protocol targeting the adrenal, neurological, and immune systems simultaneously. Rhodiola root got forgotten in Western psychiatry because stress became a pharmaceutical category. Antidepressants, anxiolytics, beta blockers, and a Siberian root that resolves stress physiology at its biological source generates no repeat prescription revenue for a system built on managing the symptoms indefinitely. Think of it as the nervous system's shock absorber, forged in the harshest climate on Earth, trusted by the toughest people in history, and more urgently necessary in the modern world than at any point since the Vikings first pulled it from the frozen ground. Number 20, Fo-Tai root, the ancient longevity root that Chinese emperors kept secret from their own people. For over 1,000 years, Fo-Tai root was classified in traditional Chinese medicine not merely as a healing herb but as a jiang tonic, a substance believed to replenish the foundational life essence that the human body slowly depletes from birth onward. Chinese emperors consumed it privately. Taoist masters prescribed it exclusively to advanced practitioners. The legendary herbalist Li Qingyuan, documented by Chinese government records as having lived to an extraordinary age, reportedly consumed Fo-Tai root as a daily staple for his entire adult life. It was the most closely guarded botanical secret in a civilization that had been studying medicinal plants for 5,000 years. Here's what most people miss. The root that Chinese emperors kept secret from their own populations for a millennium contains compounds that modern anti-aging science is only now beginning to understand and cannot yet replicate. Fo-Tai root Polygonum multiflorum contains stilbene glycosides, specifically 2,3,5,4-tetrahydroxystilbene 2,0-beta-D-glucoside or THSG, compounds confirmed in peer-reviewed research to activate the SIRT1 longevity gene, inhibit MAO-B enzyme activity associated with age-related dopamine depletion, and demonstrate potent neuroprotective activity against amyloid beta plaque accumulation in brain tissue. Modern geroscience research published in Aging Cell confirmed that THSG extends cellular lifespan in laboratory models by activating the same sertraline pathways targeted by resveratrol at significantly higher biological potency. Here's why it works. Fo-Tai root does not treat a single age-related symptom. It addresses the molecular machinery of aging itself, the gene expression patterns, the neurotransmitter depletion, and the cellular repair systems that determine how quickly your biology unravels over time. Traditional use included preparing the processed root, known as Hishu Wu, in black bean broth for sustained consumption over months and years as a longevity and vitality tonic. Combining it with goji berry and astragalus root in classical Chinese longevity formulations prescribed for graying hair, diminishing kidney function, and age-related cognitive decline, and taking the root consistently across decades rather than weeks. Understanding that its deepest benefits accumulate over time the way compound interest does. Fo-Tai root got forgotten in Western medicine because longevity is not a billable diagnosis, and a root that slows the biological mechanisms of aging at the genetic level represents an existential challenge to every pharmaceutical category built on treating the downstream consequences of getting old. Think of it as the biological clock's winding key, ancient beyond the reach of modern science, precise beyond the ambition of pharmaceutical chemistry, and patient enough to have waited 1,000 years for the rest of the world to finally ask the right question. And there you have it. 20 forgotten medicinal roots pulled from ancient scripture, indigenous wisdom, imperial secrecy, and classified military research that modern science is only now confirming your ancestors already understood completely. The pattern across every single one of these roots is the same. They were not forgotten because they stopped working. They were forgotten because the system that replaced them needed them to disappear. If you made it this far, if you're sitting there realizing that the most powerful pharmacy on earth has been growing beneath your feet for thousands of years, smash that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of knowledge deserves to reach more people. Drop a comment below and tell me, which one of these 20 roots surprised you the most? I read every single comment and I genuinely love hearing what lands for you. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, click that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell, because every week we go deeper into the forgotten botanical wisdom that your grandparents lived by and that modern science is racing to catch up with. Thanks for spending this time with me today. Remember, the most powerful healing has never required a prescription. It has only ever required memory. I'll see you in the next one. Happy healing.